Hello and welcome to this AgFunderNews roundtable all about GLP-1s and the food industry. I'm Elaine Watson. So about 6% of US adults are taking these drugs according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, with about 12% having tried them at some point. But what would it mean for the food industry if 10 or even 20% of people were on these drugs at any given time? Should they become better tolerated, more affordable and more accessible? Would that be an existential threat? Or could it actually positively reshape the food system? I'm here with a panel of experts to find out. So on the bottom right, we have Dr. Ryan Kane, who is Assistant Professor at the Food Medicine Institute at Tufts University. Bottom left, we have Stephen Finn, who is Managing Partner at VC firm City Capital. Top right, we have Nick Fereday, an independent advisor, speaker and writer with 30 years experience in the food industry. And in the middle at the top, we have Dr. Zohar Barbash, who is co-founder at Lembas, which is a startup making a peptide for appetite regulation. So thank you all for joining me. So let's start with a lightning round where we get some predictions about where we might be in 2030. Let's just look into the crystal ball. Ryan, just take us forward. What new versions of these drugs, what new delivery formats are coming?
Yeah, that's an ever-evolving field, and it sounds like we have some great expertise on the call in the field. You know, I think as the GLP-1s and the related multi-agonist or multi-target drugs continue to develop, we're going to just see kind of a tidal wave of change in terms of what's available for patients when trying to manage weight, as well as all these other kind of various cardiometabolic and even neurological diagnoses that the GLP-1s and related drugs have shown evidence for. I think what's really on people's minds is the transition to oral formulations of these medications, you know, particularly for some of these other conditions beyond diabetes. It's mostly been through the subcutaneous injecting pins. And so, you know, this pivot to an oral formulation would be potentially much more palatable for patients, as well as a lot easier in terms of distribution and accessibility, and ideally a lower cost alternative as we're thinking about the expansion of these. And there's a lot of kind of small molecules, as well as other versions of things like semaglutide that are coming out that I think are really going to be game changing in terms of increasing those numbers of folks that you mentioned who have been using those GLP-1.
You used the word multi-agonist. So could you just explain what you mean by that and what we're talking about? And could that affect the tolerability of these drugs as well if they're hitting multiple receptors?
Definitely, yeah. So already getting into the weeds a little bit here, but these multi-agonist medications, we have, you know, one big one on the market, tirzepatide. And, you know, what they do is they're hitting different receptors or different areas in the body to try and increase the effect of these medications, which are already quite powerful, and then also at the same time reduce some of those side effects or reasons that folks may not be able to tolerate the medications. And so, you know, I think that what we've seen already in the data is that tirzepatide as a multi-agonist drug increases the amount of weight loss and also notably reduces the amount of GI side effects. And when we're looking down for the upcoming medications that are in, you know, the phase 2 and 3 trials, there are even more targets that these drugs are looking at to potentially increase that effect, whether it's just on weight or other cardiometabolic outcomes, and then continuing to sort of decrease those side effects. So it's becoming a much more complicated world than that.
Okay, so Nick, look ahead to 2030. Do you think the food and supplements aisle, restaurant menus are going to look radically different, or is this going to just kind of accelerate, in your view, existing trends like protein, fiber, portion control, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the crystal ball stuff's always fun. I mean, we have obviously no way of knowing. I mean, I don't think radical change really fits in the food industry particularly well.
Yes.
And the whole debacle with plant-based foods, how that was going to be a revolution is a recent example. And it's also probably why, you know, the Maha movement will have difficulty getting so much stuff done in 2 to 3 year time frame, because we're trying to change the eating habits that we've accumulated over decades. And so absolutely more people for the arguments that Ryan gave will be on these drugs. In fact, we'll probably be all on these drugs. And using them as lifestyle ones. I do think the point that Ryan mentioned about all the metabolic and cardiovascular benefits to these drugs is that the food aspect, the weight loss might actually be the least interesting aspect of these drugs when we look back. But in terms of the food, how it plays out with food, we still need to understand the mechanisms of what's driving food noise, and how does it control our impulses. But it is, at this point, it is pushing us towards more healthy, nutrient-dense diets in the same way that the MAHA movement is trying to do. And I think that's utterly fascinating. So we may see an acceleration or more momentum to the protein trend that you mentioned. I mean, everyone talks about peak protein, but this is adding, and that may be how companies choose to express it, in their marketing and stuff. We've been waiting forever for fiber to take off.
Is it finally on the cusp of greatness?
We haven't seen it in 25 years, so it's definitely time for it to shine again since, Atkins at the start of the century. But, we'll need more than labels on tote bags saying fiber is the new protein to make that happen. We're going to have a lot of, creative thinking for that.
I'm just going to add now to the stage Dr. Devon.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I just got the link.
No worries about that. Dr. Devon Golam is VP Science and Innovation at Step Change Innovations. And this is perfectly timed, Devon, because you, as I understand it, have been taking a GLP-1 drug, but also work in the food industry. Can you give us any insights into how this has changed your shopping and eating habits?
Sure, absolutely. To be simple, I eat less. It's also really changed the window of when I eat because, of course, GLP-1 receptor agonists slow gastric emptying. So I find if I go to bed with a full stomach, I have some side effects in the morning when I wake up. I have had to eat dinner a lot earlier. To accommodate that. And I don't always get hungry right away in the morning. So I'm almost on a modified intermittent fasting schedule, if you will. But, as you have talked about food noise too, my food noise has decreased quite a bit. And I used to crave sweets quite a bit. And now they're more of an occasional treat. And it's really allowed me to focus more on making better choices when I am eating at the grocery store.
Are you looking for, I've just been at a UC Davis event looking at GLP-1 drugs, and there's food companies there, and a Mister event where people are looking at formulations, companion products and so on. Are you looking for specific products that meet your needs that are labeled as such, or are you just, going to the store and, how are you, thinking about,
Sure. It's a little bit of a mix of both. Of course, being in the industry, I'm in tune with new product launches that are coming out supporting GLP-1 patients. So there are a few things I take that are marked as GLP-1 support, especially like protein powders and fiber powders and things like that, because with eating less, I want my nutrition to matter more. And of course, those are the two best macronutrients that I can get into my diet. So but I don't know if the average consumer is necessarily looking for GLP-1 support. They might be curious. They might, I think we have to be very careful of how we're labeling GLP-1 on products. I think people are trying to capitalize on the fact that these drugs are kind of magic for weight loss. And we don't have anything in the supplement or food industry that functions quite like a GLP-1 receptor agonist does. So I'm very careful about looking at products that have GLP-1 on it and looking more like what's in as opposed to, is it going to hurt me or not?
I think this is if you don't mind me jumping in here, I think both Nick and Devin brought up really important points that is helpful to contextualize a little bit. The first, these two sort of nutrients that we're talking about, protein and fiber, as being the things that we're really focusing on for folks with GLP-1s. One piece on the protein that I want to point out that I think we miss a lot is if you look back to our most recent dietary guidelines for Americans, we actually get enough protein in our diets.
Yes.
The things that we don't get enough of are the fiber and the minimally processed foods, fruits and vegetables, and healthy sources of fats like fish and seafood. Now, when we're thinking about what Devin is talking about in regards to our caloric intake is a lot lower when we're on GLP-1s and related medications. And so there's a little bit of added pressure to make sure you're getting a comprehensive, balanced dietary pattern to meet all of your various needs. And I think we've gotten very excited about the potential adverse outcomes with reduced muscle mass and bone loss. When we're thinking about wanting to increase those things, our mind goes to protein.
Yes.
And yes, it's important to make sure you're getting adequate protein, which we do have targets that we are kind of supposing. We don't have great literature on why we're setting these protein targets a little bit higher. But if we're not doing the resistance activity to support the muscle and bone health, the protein is then supposed to support that kind of strengthening of the bone and strengthening of the muscle after the resistance exercise. What that protein is actually going to do is just potentially turn into fat because it's extra calories. Now we are, having a calorie reduced diet when we're on GLP-1. So it's a little bit of a give and take, but I worry that we might be missing the mark when we're just talking about increasing protein period in our dietary patterns. And I think that the food industry in particular is capitalizing on this trend as protein being this kind of hot nutrient that if you have enough protein, all of your woes will go away. Wherein I think that the resistance exercise is really the key for us.
You have such a good point, Ryan. I mean, I see a personal trainer and I do have resistance training as part of my regimen. I'm also perimenopausal. So, I worry about losing muscle mass just as an aging woman, in turn with the GLP-1s, but you're so right. It does help to lose weight for sure, the GLP-1s, but we need a more comprehensive approach to make sure that we're optimizing what we're taking in, but then optimizing what our body does with it through exercise. So I think that's a valid point. I mean, of course, protein is going to help with satiety overall. And, protein, some people are looking to gain, muscle mass for a variety of reasons, athletes and things like that. So I think protein's still going to be a hot topic. And it seems to be a very interesting debate lately, like, is the daily value enough, should or, and you're right, there isn't a ton of good science on it at the moment, but maybe that will change. But the point you need the diet and exercise to go hand in hand is obviously not lost on me.
No, so that's great, Emma. That's wonderful to hear.
So I want to talk a bit about the mechanism of action of these drugs and to explore to what extent it is possible to use our understanding of those mechanisms to design new supplements or foods, and to bring in Zohar and Stephen. So, but Ryan, just briefly, what is the mechanism of action for these drugs? And also, how do these drugs, are they modified to resist sort of enzymatic degradation?
Yeah, this is a great point. And one thing where I usually start when we're thinking about mechanism is go back to what our body does originally. And Devin brought up that protein, like several other nutrients, fiber being one when digested in our gut, making short chain fatty acids, they promote satiety. And actually one of the main ways that they do that is they trigger GLP-1 release from our intestines that both go into our bloodstream, as well as straight from the vagus nerve up to our brain to say, hey, we're eating a meal, the meal is filling, we don't need to eat any more food. Now, interestingly, GLP-1 in our bloodstream naturally is degraded very fast by different enzymes, some of which have been prior targets for diabetes medications. And so what many of the GLP-1 receptor agonists are doing is sort of simulating glucagon, and they're trying to stimulate insulin sensitivity, and our body's production of insulin. That's kind of one piece of it, the sort of hormonal aspect. Then there's also the slowing of the gastric emptying, which Devin talked about as well. Mm-hmm. And then the direct sort of neuronal effects, mostly in the central nervous system, when we're thinking about food noise and satiety and trying to increase our satiety. Now, that's sort of GLP-1. The GIPs, there's a kind of a alphabet soup of targets that I think it might be sort of too in the weeds to get into, but they're all doing sort of variations on that theme, some of which are working in ways to decrease those side effects by kind of modulating a little bit further.
If I may ask, or maybe you could clarify a little bit, Ryan, because my understanding with the GLP-1 medications is that they have a much longer half-life than GLP-1 that's naturally occurring in the body. So that's why we have...
Yeah, I understand they've been kind of modified. There's a kind of fatty acid sort of tail that resists.
Yeah, that was a great point that I neglected to mention.
Yeah.
You're totally right. So not only are the sort of medication GLP-1s given at kind of multi orders of magnitude higher levels than the GLP-1 that we have in our bloodstream, they're also formulated in ways to be degraded a lot slower and be released slower, which one of the kind of that depends on how it's being given, whether oral or in the sub-Q tissue themselves, in terms of the duration of activity and how those GLP-1s or related molecules are having their prolonged effects, which even sort of looking forward to future medications, not only are we looking at kind of different small molecule targets and oral delivery systems, but also folks are looking at, well, can we have longer acting injectable medications that last for a month or a year? And so, I think as the pharmaceutical industry is getting kind of more nuanced and sophisticated in this space, there's a lot of active interest in those two pathways, kind of sustained activity through continued subcutaneous injections, as well as sort of the oral medications to simplify the administration. Great.
So with that in mind, Zohar, what can you do as a food tech company, if you like? Is it about encouraging the body to produce more, exogenous production of these hormones, or is it about designing peptides that are going to activate these receptors in a kind of similar way to the drugs? And then how do you deal with this issue of enzymatic breakdown? What's the opportunity, if you like, in the food tech space?
So, first, I will start with the need, which we didn't talk about. First, there are many people that want to use the drugs and cannot because of side effects. So there is a blue ocean there of people that can benefit from any other kind of treatment that is not the GLP-1 agonist. The other thing is that many people, after 18 months, after 2 years, they feel they don't want to use it anymore. They are looking for other solutions. They lost the weight. They don't want to use the drugs because it's not fun. It makes them feel that they have no passion, that they don't want to do stuff that they used to do. And they say, okay, I lost the weight. I can stop it. And once they discontinue, then they gain back all the weight. So this is where the food companies and companies for supplements like us can contribute to the world or to people, let's say. The approach that we took, but I think that many other companies will come, and also in the research, is that instead of looking at the GLP-1 and GLP-1 receptors itself, we are looking upstream. We are looking at the receptor for fatty acids in the intestine. And these receptors are, when they are activated, they are activating the GLP-1 itself. Now, there are ways, and there were drugs before that were activating these receptors. It's possible to do. The thing is to leave them for a longer time in the gut and to make it sustain make the effects more sustainable and leave it for a longer time. But there are also other ways to look at increasing the GLP-1, GAP, PYY without not in the bloodstream, but through your natural way of consuming food. So instead of consuming fatty acids, which are giving you the calories, they are making you, right? They are making you feel full, but they're also giving you calories. We are giving the body peptides, but it could be also protein or any other activators that are going to the intestines and activating the same pathway of satiety, of fullness that the food is activating. So you have a small peptide instead of a steak, and you feel the same thing. That's the principle of the way we are working. I think in this space there will be more innovation for people that are seeking for other option. And this innovation can be translated into food. And this is what we are doing. So we want to put our peptides into food. So you will have, the name is lembas, you will have like a bread with your peptide in it, and you will feel like you have eaten 2 steaks instead of just a small bite. Other companies, I think, will follow. I think what the big change is that we understand what to look for. We know that if you have in your body higher GLP-1, it means you're successful. For a food company, I say, it's like finding maybe think about there is a better imaging machine for doctors to find tumors. So for us, the GLP-1 itself is a better way to know that we are successful as researchers.
Stephen, I want to bring you in here. You know what tech people are like. Tech is the answer. Now what's the question, right? But what is the investor angle here? Is there one? Is there going to be a new wave of food tech startups making supplements, or is it more about companion products? Where's the opportunity if there is one?
Yeah, I think the opportunity is huge and goes across a couple of different verticals, right? The first I'd talk about, right, Ryan and Devin earlier were talking about what do you get for just add protein? I think the CPG industry has spent the last couple of years just adding protein because they think that's what the consumers want. I think this is really, with GLP, a seismic shift in the other side of the coin, right? Which is now the protein need is there, the protein demand is there, but it needs to be offset by the fact that it's not just being added, it needs to be against fewer calories and more nutrient dense food all around. So like we have a couple companies in our portfolio. The ones I think about are like Magic Spoon cereal, and IMI is a high protein ramen noodle company. There are companies that were already doing very well, but I think are very well positioned to capitalize on that nutrient density trade-off and to attract a whole new group of people who maybe were not interested in the high protein breakfast cereal a couple of years ago, but now that they're making this shift and they're really making this decision to be healthier and they may like cereal, right? That this higher protein but still nutrient dense and low calorie version of existing staples gets a real opportunity to shine with the masses that are looking to shift how they're eating for maybe the first time. Right. So I think on the CPG side, it's protein and fiber fortification, but given the need for kind of nutrient density and calorie reduction is going to drive that next wave of products that make sense for this market. The next thing I would talk about is the functional ingredients and soluble proteins. Companies maybe like Vivici, who has a clear protein, that clear whey protein that they make via precision fermentation, right? That I think is a really good fit to get into a lot of these food products because of its solubility, because of its clarity, right? Because it maybe is the right protein to address the job I just talked about, right? Which is creating a new wave of CPG products that have that protein density without the trade-offs of just kind of adding it to something that already exists. And we've seen a couple of clear whey protein brands taking off in CPG land. I think the companies that are producing the higher end, more functional versions of these proteins are a wave. I mean, we've all been seeing these food tech companies for years, but I think that in this market, they're reasonably well positioned to take on that next generation of CPG stuff. I think the next group I'd talk about is the kind of complement in the form of side effect mitigation stuff, right? So we've seen a whole new crop of supplement brands that are trying to put everything together in one supplement as like, take this with your GLPs and it'll address the vast majority of common side effects. Definitely have seen a couple of companies like that, but I've also seen a couple of really interesting ingredient companies right? And things like, again, back to stuff that's been around for a couple of years, right? But all these companies that are focused on lactoferrin, right? Lactoferrin and its iron absorption benefits and all the kind of halo around the benefits of eating lactoferrin work really nicely against this market in the side effect mitigation stuff and in the nutritional density stuff. I think that the next category I would talk about is the alternatives, right? The stuff that looks like Lembas, and full disclosure, we're an investor in Lembas. I love what you guys are up to. Heart's good stuff. But yeah, I think two sides of the alternative market, right? One is Lembas, right? We're making an ingredient that is going to go into somebody else's branded food or supplement product and achieve these goals. We've also seen a whole bunch of alternatives that are really more brand first. I think of things like Supergut, which I've been taking for years and I think is great. But that's really sort of the brand first, less tech forward version of the alternatives market. I think Zohar was dead on with, right? The alternatives are for several groups of people. They're the I will never inject myself people. They're the I need to get off this because it didn't work or the side effects were too much to bear people. There's the I need to get off it because it worked and I don't want to do this forever people. And how do we ease off and back into, not taking the drugs? I do think it's early days, but there is some argument that we should all be taking the drugs forever, right? I know me personally, I first heard about them probably 4 or 5 years ago, and then spent the next 3 years waiting for the other shoe to drop and hear all about all the negative effects. And I kind of joke that it seems like the other shoe is longevity, and that maybe we should all just be on these. So I'm not sure how much the getting off of it use case is important going forward, but I think that remains to be seen. And then I think there's just like the supportive ecosystem products, right? That's where people who are really starting to take their nutrition seriously for maybe the first time in their lives are maybe great candidates to use continuous glucose monitors and all this kind of additional hardware and software. And there's muscle mass retention focus, and that could be supplements and drugs. There's the ecosystem is huge and awesome, and I'm really enjoying spending a lot of time in it, I guess, is my summary here.
I guess just going back though to this question, I'm the food tech editor, right? So is it possible, there's a lot of cynicism around the whole nature's Ozempic angle because, as you say, Ryan, you've got these drugs, they're filling the body with vast amounts and of this drug, and also they are modified in a way that resists enzymatic degradation and so on. So they're fundamentally different to, say, a fiber that would stimulate GLP-1 that would then be sort of broken down very quickly in the body. But is there a kind of middle way, if you like, between the things that naturally stimulate these hormones and the drugs that kind of sits in the middle? We're seeing these companies now doing kind of protein discovery, designer peptides that are designed to activate these receptors that haven't been investigated yet as drugs. Is that, an area of opportunity, Stephen? Or, you've seen companies in that space, in that gray area, if you like, in between food and drugs?
I think it is. Sorry, one in our portfolio is One Bio. Right, they make these short chain fibers that are really valuable in satiety, and I think that like if the goal is satiety, there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. If we start talking about all of the ancillary benefits we've been talking about, in addition to sort of the core weight loss concept, I think different things are going to compete and complement in different ways.
If I may just jump in here, we've talked about a lot of great and interesting things. I think it's remiss if we don't talk about a couple of really big challenges that we haven't broached yet. One is with these medications and with sort of the vast amounts of people who would qualify, just thinking on the obesity lens, where over 4 in 10 Americans have a diagnosis of obesity and could qualify, but it's insurance dependent. And we've seen the costs of these drugs, and I'll say that they're coming down in ways that are both interesting and challenging through things like direct to consumer, as well as compounded medications that may make them a more affordable option. But even with these cost reductions, the quality of life adjusted years gained they're not cost effective yet. They're close for tirzepatide, probably. There was a great report that came out in April from the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review looking at this. And their big takeaway was, as the cost comes down, they'll become more cost-effective drugs, but it's not affordable or financially sustainable for, one, the American people, or two, our American healthcare system to think about providing these medications for the vast quantity of people who would benefit. And so, I think it's exciting to think about how many people could benefit. And, as a physician and a primary care doctor, I want my patients to get the medications that are going to affect their health outcomes in a positive way and help them achieve their health goal, knowing that, we also have to think about their individual financial well-being, of which many people cannot afford a $500 a month medication, or variations on that theme. And so, we have to be thinking about alternative strategies, what's right for what person. I'm excited by all the sort of talk about different changes in the food system. One of my big worries is that what we have seen is that processed foods in the literature tend to be foods that have caused a lot of problems that were unlikely. Thinking about things like processed meat, sugar sweetened beverages, fast foods, frozen meals, takeout foods that have all these additives in them. And so to me, I get a little nervous when we're thinking about just adding more additives into foods that may help with some of the downstream effects. And, especially if you're marketing an additive that could be beneficial, but then used by another company that has lots of other additives that may have harmful health effects. And so, we'll need to regulate the system and be very cautious about where we're putting different things that can be biologically active. And then on the flip side of that, my hope with some of these individual sort of changes on food noise and food preferences, preferring minimally processed foods, fruits, vegetables, nuts, beans, whole grains, yogurts, seafoods, these healthy food items that sort of in the large amounts of nutrition epidemiology literature and controlled studies that we have are health promoting. My hope would be that we have some more movement in the food industry space to try and encourage the consumption and the production of these foods. One of the things that we're doing at the Food as Medicine Institute is thinking about how healthcare can get involved in this conversation, because, we're prescribing a lot of these medications, but we're not necessarily providing these wraparound comprehensive services to help folks with different diagnoses, from kind of on the prevention, management, and treatment of disease side to use sort of targeted evidence-based nutritional strategies to help intervene. And I think, that it has to be coupled with that other exercise, physical activity piece of things when we're thinking about really maximizing our benefits. And there's a lot, there's so many different sort of tech solutions for changing dietary patterns, changing activity patterns, tracking. And so I think that, companies that are coupling all of these things in addition to maybe your GLP-1 or related medication use will probably be more successful. And hopefully we can know the things that do work. And a lot of, the short chain fatty acids do promote satiety, but that comes from fiber, from a healthy gut microbiota. When they break down the fiber, we create the short chain fatty acids, then stimulate that GLP-1 release in satiety. And so can we just get people to eat more fiber, to Nick's earlier point?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because again, looking at some of these industry events, you've got large food companies who have been over the years producing highly processed foods with lots of highly refined carbs and so on, and then the solution to this problem again that they've created is creating more highly processed foods with ever more soluble protein, so we can pack 30 grams of protein into a water and so on. And it's just an interesting take, rather than maybe pushing people towards eating more unprocessed foods, more fruits and vegetables, things like existing products, maybe Greek yogurt or things like that. Nick, I just wanted to ask you again about this. This Cornell study a couple of years ago found that households with GLP-1 users reduced grocery spending, and you got the sharpest decline in kind of chips, sweetened baked goods, and soda. And I think there was a slight increase in yogurts and fresh produce, and also reduced food away from home expenditure. I mean, could this in a weird way actually kind of reshape the food industry, not just to make us eat less, but eat better.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, right? We're actually talking about the most complex thing in the world. As you know, it's as I think it's Kevin Hall who says, you know, it's not rocket science. It's a lot more complicated than that. Gosh, where to start? So just to back up, we still don't understand a lot of the mechanisms, right? The scientists for the GLP-1 stuff are making discoveries, I'm going to say every day, right? There's something, you know, and so that's really interesting. You know, how are we getting all these health benefits that are not necessarily tied to just losing weight and what have you? And with the whole ultra-processed food stuff, we don't understand the mechanisms there either, right? The research has not been done. We know it's been done for sugar, salt, and fat, as you affectionately called it, junk food earlier. But for the ultra-processed food stuff, we don't know, you know. And so we have to remember all of that. So there is a question of, like, you know, if we try and do some policy work on this stuff with incomplete information, we may end up with really unwanted and unintended consequences on all of this. So we know that people eat less and they are eating differently, but we don't know why they're eating differently, to get back to your point. It could be, you know, the food noise stuff, it's giving them willpower and that. It could be that they are actually listening to the medical doctors, the advisors, and eating, making these lifestyle changes. Because these drugs were not meant to be used in isolation. They are an adjunct, right? You're meant to use it with change in lifestyle and a reduced calorie diet. And those two things by themselves should reduce in weight loss, but they don't. So I think the really interesting thing, which, you know, hopefully Ryan and his team are working on, is how you can merge these drugs with the accepted wisdom to eat more whole foods, which we've been, you know, people have been telling the population to do for decades with no impact, right? And you know, we should recognize that these drugs are a fantastic addition to the portfolio of options, and how can we merge that with what we know? But we need to avoid that Marie Antoinette thing of, you know, well, if only people ate more fruits and vegetables, because, you know, there's the equity issue of access to these drugs, but there's the equity issue of the unattainability of some of these whole food type diets for most people.
Yes. And I love what both Nick and Ryan said. And if I just may add a little bit of my own thoughts. So the money issue on the drugs themselves and the access to food, huge. Like I got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and that's why I'm on these drugs. And my doctor was thrilled because she said, now I can prescribe them to you and insurance will cover them. So, you know, so that's one thing. You know, one thing that I think we need to think about in terms of, you know, the whole ultra processed food debate and, you know, better nutrition. Remember that we have all of these nutritionists and dietitians there too. I mean, with all due respect to you, Ryan, of course, I mean, and I'm even married to a physician, you know, doctors are wonderful, but dietitians will have, you know, in my experience, professionally and personally, dietitians, nutritionists are going to have a lot better tips to implement that, you know, can directly impact your day-to-day life versus your primary care physician that you see every so often. So I really think that dietitians need to be part of this conversation as to how we're making food changes. And then, you know, with ultra processed foods, you know, it is a huge debate. And, you know, I've definitely have a lot of opinions as a food scientist, but I think, you know, we need to work on altering that definition a little bit of what actually is ultra processed, because I find that the NOVA system is a little bit more politically motivated, I hate to say, but, you know, not all ultra processed foods are equal. So the comparison I always use is protein powder and Skittles. They would both be ultra processed under the NOVA system. One has an infinitely better health halo around it versus the other. So, you know, and you know, we might make Skittles better by removing the artificial colors, but at the end of the day, there's still sugar. So, you know, I think we need to work on the priorities of things that we're adjusting to that are going to have the most maximal benefit for everyone. There's a lot we need to do to help with obesity, to help with healthcare, to help with our food system. And it's never going to be an easy fix. And there's always going to be different things at play. going against each other. Eating whole foods and eating more fresh foods, infinitely better, of course, but not everyone's going to have access to it. Not everyone's going to have access to the drugs. There's so many different things to consider.
I just want to ask you about, because Steve talked about this as well. I mean, do you see these drugs becoming like statins that people will just take, forever? Once you're on them, you stay on them, or is either the side effect issue or just the cost, the affordability issue going to mean that just isn't going to happen? I mean, what do you, I know it's impossible, I'm putting you on the spot here, but
no,
in 5-10 years time that these will be something like statins that, significant portion of the population is just staying on? Or
yeah, I mean, I've kind of accepted in my personal case that I will probably be on them for life, because I actually did hit the criteria barely to get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And I'm fine with that. I've mitigated, I had some side effects coming on them, but they've, through changing when I eat and, maybe having a lot of ginger ale on hand, sugar-free, of course, that's helped to mitigate a lot of the side effects, and they've gone away over time. But there's definitely, sort of a barrier to entry, I guess, because they're the worst when you get on them. Once you kind of get settled in and get a routine, it's completely manageable, or at least it has been in my case. With all the other benefits that people have talked about, and I might have missed a little bit of this when you were talking about it early on, but I know that, there's reduced risk of heart disease. There could be some cognitive benefits at some point. We see, some more smaller studies coming out so far that it's helping reduce other addictions like gambling and drinking. That could be cause alone for people to be on them for life, if it's really helping with some whatever noise you're trying to shut off in that regard. For people that are just trying to lose weight, they may come off of them, may want to look for a way to come off of them once they've hit their goal weight. If they've just done it from a purely obesity standpoint, as opposed to the benefits for diabetes. I think, and one thing I was thinking about when Ryan was talking earlier, like there's one of the other issues that I see at play is, we need more clinical substantiation for ingredients and supplements that are affecting the GLP-1 system. But then when you start testing on people like me who are on GLP-1 receptor agonists, we are a diseased population. So you can't exactly, use us for doing regulatory compliance and claim substantiation for a supplement itself. So there's some different things that we need to work on there. But, and also in my case, being type 2 diabetic, and maybe Ryan can comment on this, I would imagine my GLP-1 receptors are probably not as well poised for working, or my GLP-1 levels are not the best compared to a healthy individual. So if we're looking at, there's a lot of ingredients out there that say that they're improving increasing GLP-1 in the body. But if my system's already messed up, does increasing my endogenous GLP-1 production really help? I don't know. These are some questions that we need to answer a little bit more.
Yeah, Ryan, can I just bring you in here, and just that question about statins as well? Do you see these as things that people will simply be on for years and years, and is that a good or a bad thing? And what about people that are cycling on and off these drugs? Are you worried about the metabolic effects of that?
Yeah, so Devin and Nick both talked about some really important concepts that I'll sort of weave into my response here, which, as we're thinking about GLP-1 medications, the indication matters, so the disease state that we're trying to treat. However, obesity, like really all of the disease states that we have been talking about, are complicated. The origins are complicated. Why we have them are complicated. It's likely a factor of sort of intergenerational genetic effects plus environment, environment being our entire global context and food environment, as well as our individual ability to access, healthy outdoor activities and access healthy foods. And then also sort of individual lifestyle things. So it's a complicated network of things that are driving obesity and these other cardiometabolic outcomes and even sort of the neurological outcomes that we're looking at. Now, when we're thinking about, how we've managed these different disease states in the past, let's just take high blood pressure, hypertension, for example. when you start a patient on a blood pressure medication, maybe they respond to it and their blood pressure is controlled. Generally, patients are often on those medications for life, to your point on statins. And when we take them off of the high blood pressure medication, their blood pressure goes back up. Now, there are some people where if we do intensive lifestyle interventions, their blood pressure can come down and get into a normal range without medications. And sometimes you just need the medication for a little while to get to that goal range. Some people still can't get there, and they still can't get there with 1, 2, 3, 4 medications. And so people respond differently, not only to sort of the lifestyle piece of things, but also to individual medications. And, oftentimes we're thinking about these as chronic medications. Now, for the GLP-1s, just targeting in on those, when we're looking at weight, we historically have treated weight and obesity as a different disease than, all of these other cardiometabolic diseases. Now, I think there's a lot of baked in stigma and bias as to why we have treated obesity differently, both in our healthcare setting, in our insurance and regulatory setting, and politically. But generally, most obesity medicine providers and primary care providers are contextualizing obesity as a chronic disease that requires chronic treatment. What we've seen from the long-term sort of discontinuation studies of GLP-1s, when you discontinue the GLP-1s, you regain the weight and you lose many of those cardiometabolic benefits, the reduced rates of heart disease, things like that. And so, not only is the weight part of the benefits that you're getting, but to Devin's point, a lot of those changes are happening in the first few weeks to months, especially once you get up to that max dose, you're getting sort of that maximum benefit change of health outcomes. But then you plateau in terms of your weight loss. And over the next, year or so, 6 months to a year, your weight sort of plateaus and you don't continue to lose weight generally. But you still have benefits in heart disease, your reduced lipids, kidney protection. And then when we're thinking about other disease states like diabetes, to Devin's point about maybe my GLP-1 receptors aren't quite as good as somebody else's. What we've seen in the literature is folks with diabetes tend to lose less weight than folks without diabetes who are on GLP-1. So I think there's some merits there that say, right now, 4 in 10 Americans have more than one chronic disease. And so we can't, be extrapolating totally what we see in these trials where we're just looking at one disease state on effects for the whole population, because it's a lot more.
I just want to ask about this issue of people cycling on and off these drugs, though. If people take the drugs, they lose the weight, and then they think they've got the tools to hopefully maintain that weight loss, but it's a struggle, and then they go back on the drugs, then lose some more weight. Do you see that? Do you see that happening? And is that a concern? If we see with the Biggest Loser, as people you go on and off, these sort of yo-yo dieting, that it affects their metabolism.
Yeah. So the short answer is yes and yes. So what we worry about with people coming on and off, particularly medications, GLP-1s, when you lose a lot of weight, whether it's from medications or surgery, you lose weight in all categories. You lose weight in fat mass and muscle mass and bone mass, all categories. Now, when you regain weight, particularly with what we see with GLP-1s, you're oftentimes regaining more fat mass than you had previously. And so that's one, a concern. But two, when people are going on and off, and you've mentioned that, up to 12% of folks had tried a GLP-1 in the US and 6% are still on or using a GLP-1. People are coming on and off. And, as a primary care provider, I've seen in real life why this happens. It's multifactorial. It's cost. It's access. It's, changing insurance coverage. And so there are many factors that are causing patients to go on and off. And that creates, a potential for what we call weight cycling, which there's a pretty robust literature base to say that weight cycling actually worsens your outcomes pretty significantly. And so when we're thinking about, the viability of coming off of these medications and back on, we have to be pretty targeted with what we're expecting when that happens, in terms of, are we expecting patients to maintain the same cardiometabolic benefits when they're coming on and off? What is sort of a safe amount of weight to be losing and regaining, how are we approaching that with our patients? Are we approaching it from a non-stigma, non-bias frame? And then also recognizing, what patient is going to benefit from what, which is sort of what we call in research the heterogeneity of treatment effects. So who's going to benefit from lifestyle? Who's going to benefit from this drug or that drug? For how long? How? And then who needs additional support services? And, I think we talked a little bit, Devin, about dietitian supports, and then Nick talked about actually getting those whole food healthy dietary patterns to folks. And how do we do that? And these are things that, that we're talking about and thinking about at the Institute, as well as, not only when we're providing the food, but also, do you need medical nutrition therapy from a dietitian, which unfortunately is not covered for a lot of patients for very many sessions, especially for just obesity. And then the last thing I'll say too, when we're thinking about access to all these things, there is some growing movement amongst state Medicaid plans, especially with our 1115 waivers, that are providing flexible support spending for health-related social needs like food and nutrition security. And so not only, in some states can you access, healthy food support services through food as medicine therapies like direct produce prescription cards or medically tailored groceries or medically tailored meals based on your kind of level of complexity of your diagnoses and activities of daily living impairments. But also some of these states are providing nutritional supports for things like education, culinary medicine, and then kitchen supplies. So, we're trying in healthcare to think about how we can be using our healthcare dollars more effectively, which is a much larger share of our total GDP pie than just the food industry, to affect change, both to improve health outcomes and also reduce healthcare costs, and also make sure our agricultural system is in a little bit better place than when we left it.
So, Zohar, I just want to bring you back in. What role do you see products like yours and others in this food or supplement space playing going forward? Is this for people, as you say, that for whatever reason can't afford or don't want to be on these drugs, or maybe people who have come off these drugs and are trying to maintain the weight loss? What role do you see companies like yours playing, and what kind of effects? Are they drug-like? Are they minimal? What kind of effects can you achieve with your solutions?
So, Jet, I want to point out, 20 years ago, I did my elastic operation to take off my glasses. I thought that 20 years from now, there will be no glasses at all, and nobody will buy glasses. Though all of you, and I'm the only one wearing glasses. I was in my 20s, and I was sure there will be no store for glasses in 10 years. Because who is not doing that brilliant operation, right? I think the same thing. Well, we cannot know the future, but I think we will be the glasses. So all the people that will choose not to do very intensive treatment, and a treatment that change your life, it's for good, it's for bad, but it's a drug and it's a treatment, and you will still need something complementary. And changing your lifestyle, it was here for 40 years and still it didn't work. I think what we will reach is a little change that will help people maintain or lose a little bit of weight. It will not be a drug. It will not have the same effect, but it will give them the opportunity and help them maintain what they have or reach a better lifestyle, like glasses, in the same way. So there will be a place for everybody in the end. I think that because of the understanding of the mechanism of work, there will be a lot of innovation in this space from the research side, not from the product side, because people will understand how to look for solutions that are better for you.
Can I just jump in and echo thing that you just said, Zohar? Like I really think some of the opportunities that we have in our industry are innovations like yours, where we can help people before they get to the point that I did, for instance. We can help keep people healthier and help prevent obesity and do more of that front loading work as opposed to, do more prevention as opposed to more cure. And I think I see Ryan shaking his head. Of course, you're a doctor, you with that. So there's just, GLP-1s are not going to go away anytime soon, but everything that we're learning, we can use to help prevent people from needing them in the first place, kind of like how we make vaccines for different things. So that's my hope for the industry anyways, that we'll get there in future generations.
So Nick, I was looking at some earnings calls transcripts just before this.
Poor you.
Sometimes, yes. Coca-Cola are talking about, again, they're not necessarily attributing it to GLP-1, but they're monitoring this, saying that they're seeing, again, more interest in Coke Zero, diet drinks, and so on, and fewer full sugar options. Mondelez has said that they think, this talk about GLP is a bit overblown and they're not seeing really effects yet. Yeah. Hershey is saying no material impact yet, but, we'll see next year. How are the food industry think about this? Are people panicked? Are they excited, thinking it's a new opportunity? Is it just about, again, with some of these companies with big portfolios, okay, they lose out in one area, but they will gain somewhere else?
I love it how you answer your own questions.
Yeah.
But yeah. Listen, it's a standard approach for the big guys. I think, it's kind of deny and deflect, because they're not going to admit in a public audience that what they're really thinking about these drugs. So they are going to, they all started out downplaying it 2.5 years ago. And quite rightly, I think, because then we thought that the supply was so constrained, but then because of compound pharmacies, it just, it just exploded. And you so with the large guys, it is super interesting. You do still have a group of people, and you mentioned some of them who downplay it, and these guys, as a group, have been suffering from volume declines for some time. And so to try and work out, is it a price story, or is it the GLP-1s, or is it something else that's going on to explain the decline in demand for their products is a tricky one. So they can get away by saying that. Companies like Hershey are talking about a mild one and what have you. So I think that's interesting. It's actually, and then you have another group of people like the Coca-Colas who kind of point to something in their portfolio saying, we've got this, we have something in our range, we've got the diet drinks, and so it's covered, no cause for panic. Or they may be trying to just talk about the protein of their products as a solution. There's a small group of the big players like Nestle, I would say, and Conagra and Danone, who definitely talk more about it being an opportunity and are looking for more companion side products. And so they've got the marketing brain working. I think what's really important, and I know that Steve gave quite a long list of the exciting areas around GP1 on the ingredient side, is really how a lot of, certainly the consumer-facing small companies, have not risen to this occasion and not seen it as an opportunity to date. I'm sure many of you walked around Expo West this year, where every other product was a more protein, right? So in a way it's covered, but really a handful, and it's the same name, Supergut or whatever, who are actually talking to the whole GLP-1 as a marketing opportunity. And that's despite the fact that survey after survey tell us that people on these drugs are looking for products specifically designed for their needs. And so I feel, so to sum up, big food companies, exactly what you'd expect them to be doing. Small companies, hugely disappointing that they haven't seen this as an opportunity.
I was talking to Danone's Open Innovation Manager at a recent GLP-1 event, and talking about how they're monitoring this space. But again, it's saying it's a little early to say whether it's a case of, as you say, kind of formulating particular products to support the nutritional needs of people, or looking at things within the portfolio and then how to position, or whether to position and label them, or whether it's more about, as Stephen said, maybe, there's kind of apps, there's online shopping, there's ways that you can target people who are maybe taking these medications to say, oh, you might want to look at these products, rather than having, a badge that says, GLP-1 friendly or something actually, on the shelf. So it's more about, again, or as Ryan said, in that wraparound support, talking to dietitians, maybe you want to consider these products for breakfast or whatever, rather than having sort of specially formulated products, or even kind of labeling and so on in the store. We've got like about a minute left. So super quickly, please, everybody. I'm just wondering where you think we're going to be in 2030 and whether that is in a good or a bad place with these drugs.
I'm happy to first, but first would just like to say, as far as big food goes, big food is traditionally very slow and reactive, right? There are obviously some exceptions to that.
Thoughtful. It depends how you how you want to phrase it.
That's right. I think a lot of factors are really influencing, decrease in demand over time. I think there's a whole generational distrust of big brands that influences it. I think retailers have done a really phenomenal job in the last 10 or so years of promoting their private label in a way that makes sense to consumers, and that comes after it too, right? So this is, while this has the makings of a seismic shift, it's definitely way less than the whole story as far as big food and decreasing demand for even the not sugary stuff. Where will we be in 2030? Probably not as far as anybody thinks is always my answer, right? Right. It's we are all sitting here with glasses. Many of us have had the opportunity to not have them. Things always move slower than the people who live inside this stuff every day think they will.
Yes.
But this is, I when you interviewed me a couple months ago, right, I called this our industry's AI. It is, right. And what I really mean by that is everyone, big food or otherwise, has their hottest burning fires at any given time, and really only has the bandwidth to address their hottest burning fires, not to look at the whole sea of opportunity that's out there. This has moved so quickly that it's becoming a hot burning fire for a lot of these companies and industry players, and that just means that it'll get an outsized share of attention in the next couple of years. How that actually plays out, I think it's early innings.
Okay, so Ryan, 30 seconds.
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of great stuff. I'm hopeful that in 2030, though I anticipate that Stephen is right, not a big shift will happen. I'm hopeful that the food industry will respond by encouraging foods that promote healthfulness for everybody, for the whole population. What we know about medications is most people don't want to take medications, and they definitely don't want to take it for life. All medication adherence rates are lower than 40% generally, and we've seen even lower adherence long-term with GLP-1s. I think that that'll probably improve as newer medications come out, costs improve, access improves, side effects reduce with new formulations. But that's not for everybody. And so we're going to be having to think in the healthcare setting, how can we have supportive, comprehensive services that support the dietary and lifestyle change, also target the right patient at the right time with the right medication, and then decide in a shared way, what's right for you going forward. Is this, and talking up front seriously about whether or not this is going to be a lifelong medication, because I think we'll be doing a disservice if we don't.
Devin, 30 seconds.
So in the industry, in the functional food nutraceutical industry, we see a lot of a push towards more holistic solutions, I would say, in the last 5 years, things that are, more focused on our overall well-being as opposed to one specific thing. And while GLP-1 is specifically going after weight loss, we talked a lot about diet and exercise, about how, working with our doctors, working with our dietitians. So I am hopeful that holistic approach will continue, that will, look more seriously at food as medicine, figure out ways to better define ultra processed foods so we know which ones can actually support us in on our health and wellness journey, as opposed to the ones that are to our detriment. And that we'll see a lot more collaboration between the food scientists, the investors, the independent advisors out there, the doctors, all of us working together to make all of us healthier and better.
Zohar.
Yeah, I'll be short. I think that people will look for solutions, and we will have to give them ones. So I think that it will be less accepted to be not healthy. So people will look for a solution, and it will be there.
Okay, Nick, I'll give you the final word.
Oh, that's very kind. Well, I think unless there's a radical change in our toxic food environment, we're all going to be on these drugs.
Fair enough. That was a hot take. Well, on that note, I would like to thank everybody so much for taking the time to participate today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.